So first, a little bit about Fuel Ed. So our mission is to develop emotionally intelligent educators who create relationship-driven schools. And this looks like a lot of different things, but when it comes to community gatherings, these are a monthly opportunity to connect with like-minded individuals and really just hear from other leaders in education across the country and even the world. We have someone from New Zealand here who are really putting these shared values into practice. So whether you've been with Fuel Ed before through a training and you're coming back because you want to reconnect, or you've never heard of Fuel Ed until today or recently, and you want to learn more about some of these shared values around emotional intelligence and relationship building, this is just a space to kind of build that network across the country and throughout the field of education. So just to break down our mission and kind of where this fits into the work that we do, we develop, we catalyze, and we amplify. So developing looks like trainings that we offer. These can be day-long, 3-day, small workshops that we deliver specifically for educators and school leaders across the country in empathy and genuine communication. That's sort of the heart of our work. The catalytic space is really allowing folks to connect with each other and also bring opportunities for our alumni like Kati to keep developing and growing themselves. And then finally, we amplify. So this looks like sharing our work, what we're learning by working with educators, sharing the stories of folks who've been with us and who take these ideas and implement them in their personal lives, in their school environment, and really giving them a platform to keep sharing and keep building sort of a coalition or an energetic movement towards change in how we approach education. And so tonight, we're really focusing on catalyzing each other and allowing one of our catalyzed alumni to speak more to her experience over the last couple of years. So just a reminder again on this design of the space and sort of why it's unique. First, the space is a place rooted in belonging. So it's for you and by you. Your feedback, what you want to hear and see, what you need is really the center of how we design and think about these events and these spaces. It's a space for connection. So we really encourage you to be genuine and to connect, right? To reach out, to ask for emails, to do whatever feels natural and congruent for you, to be connected and to really get the most out of this experience. And then finally, wholeness. So we realize folks are in different time zones, have children, are in their office, are at home. If you're in your pajamas, if you have your kid by your side, that's totally fine. Like bring the whole of who you are into the space. We really want to encourage you to be who you are, where you are, and to honor that difference, that uniqueness when we are together. Real quick, I'm just going to break down what we're going to be doing today, what sort of the learning objectives are, if you want to think of it that way. So we're going to learn a bit just from Kati about how she implements these identity-based practices that are ultimately really influential and powerful for the education leaders she consults with. We're going to connect just as a collective, and you're going to have the chance to connect with educators across the country. And then finally, throughout, you're going to have a chance to really engage in this embodied learning experience and learn through experience what this tool looks like and how this framework can be used in your personal life, but also in your school and professional life. Some community agreements, very essential as we share space together. So we sort of have these 3 elements that we apply across all of our programs and offerings. So first is to lean in. This basically just means being present for each other. So really listening deeply, learning and being engaged. Open up. So relax, have fun, speak your truth, respect others' truth. So be as open of a book as you feel comfortable being and trust that others will hold you and respect you in that. And then finally, take care. So in that inverse, when someone's sharing, being open, bringing themselves, really protect their stories and own your impact. So if something hits the wrong way, it drops the wrong way, be open to that feedback and be really careful and gentle with what people choose to share and what they choose to bring. And in action tonight, so these are just some reminders for us again, really encouraging you to turn on your video so we can see your faces, connect. We're an intimate group tonight as we knew we would be. And that will really enhance the experience of the activity that we're going to do together in breakout groups. Make sure that you have paper and a pen or some kind of writing utensil because the activity will require self-reflection and writing. So if you have something that you want to grab, that's great. If you prefer to type, that's also fine, but I love pen and paper. Second, be ready to share in the chat and also in breakout groups. Again, if you don't feel comfortable with that, just that Grace know either right now, like I don't want to be in any breakout groups, or before we move into those spaces that you'd like to be in a group by yourself. Totally fine. And finally, be open to sharing. We want to hear your reflections and your thoughts. So whether that's in the chat or when we come back for those group reflections, just be willing and open maybe to lean in again, to step forward and to share more of what you're thinking from a conceptual ideation side, or just from your own personal story. We'd love to hear that tonight. So those are some of the guideline pieces. I'll just pause real quick. Is there anything that other folks want to bring into the space in terms of agreements and norms that we have as a collective? Okay. I'm going to move us over to Katie. So very excited to have Katie here. So Katie's work brings person-centered coaching and professional development to school teams in pursuit of sustainability, honoring the human needs of our educators. She lives in Charlottesville, Virginia, with her husband, Tyler, and two cats, Brenda and Kelly. And you're welcome, after this time is over, to email Katie directly, go to her website, or find her on Facebook and other social media platforms. I'll be sharing my hosting abilities with Katie so that she can take us forward. And then we will hop into some of our activities here. Let's see. I made you co-host.
Got it. Thank you, Jasmine.
Perfect. And I will let Katie share.
Hi, everyone. Are there any other cat owners on the call? Because we keep talking about kids in the background, but like my cats are outside the door howling. So if you hear some cats in the background, that's why. Okay, sharing the screen now. And Jasmine, just a thumbs up. Can you see everything? Perfect. Y'all, I'm so happy to be here tonight, and this is like good for my soul. The Fuel-Led community has meant a lot to me for a long time, and I'll share more about that in just a second, but I just have to thank Jasmine and Grace and the whole team that has put in a ton of time into making this evening happen. So thank you for having me, and it's good to see everybody. So I'll start by first telling you a bit about like my orientation in the education space, which starts with the name of the work that I do. My company, if you want to call it, it's just me. It's just me out there every day. But I call it Stay the Course. And there's a story there. When I was a first year teacher, tired, afraid of failing, sitting in the parking lot, trying to get into the school for the day and show up to work, I'd call my mom, and my mom would just say like, hey, you're showing up every day. You're doing good things for kids. Keep going, stay the course. And so that's really stuck with me from my experience in the classroom. And then I carried it forward as a coach for teachers in the DC area. I know there's somebody I think Emily is from the Maryland area, but I coached early childhood teachers for about 8 years in the DC region, and saw a lot of them struggle the same way that I did. And so I was able to deeply connect on an emotional level. What Fuel-Led did for me was give me the tools to do something about it, to listen, to show empathy, to think critically, to say, hey, like, here's where we go from here. Here's a path forward. Here's how you stay the course. I know it's really cheesy, but that's really where it all comes from. And the work that I do now is focused on providing person-centered coaching and professional development for educators. Person-centered meaning like we are honoring the human needs of our people at work, acknowledging that resilience is more than just being tough in the face of challenge. It is actually a set of skills. So it is things like self-awareness, emotional intelligence, cultural competence, and just having fun when you show up to work. So concretely, I provide coaching and sessions like this and content to just help school leaders and district leaders do that. And tonight, I'd like to share with you an activity that you can both, I hope you fully engage yourself. I hope you personally get something out of yourselves. When do we ever take time to just like pause and say, let me think about myself for a minute and what I need and what I want. This is like the visual that I've created for myself. When you go through this exercise, you can use a Google Doc, you can use your phone, your notes page, you can draw or use images or words. the point I want to make is you can engage in this in whatever way is comfortable for you. So the idea is we're going to go through reflection of who we are and how we show up at work through 3 layers. And the first one is the obvious parts of your identity that people see just by looking at you. So just your physical appearance, maybe you wear a necklace or a ring, or obviously your racial or sexual identity or gender identity. Then the second layer, we go a little bit deeper and we think about the parts of ourselves that people they learn about us through conversation as they get to know you, as they work alongside you. So a little bit deeper there with that second level. And the third level are the key people and experiences, sometimes like the institutions or the places that have shaped your worldview and just how you interact with the world around you. And then finally, we're going to think about all those things, break it down and say, all right, well, what does that mean for how I build relationships at work? What does that mean for how I experience conflict or navigate conflict? What does it mean for how I give or receive feedback? All of those things are really important for sustainability at work. So when I think about the work that I do with my teachers, with my school teams, we want to feel seen and understood. We also need to see and understand the people alongside us. And I think this activity helps us get there. So if you'll give me some grace, and I hope we don't get another Zoom bomb. I'm going to share my reflections. I'm going to tell you my story. And this is a reflection. I've done this activity probably 4 or 5 times in the last few years, and I just redid it completely from scratch on Tuesday, because there's been a lot in my life that's happened in the last year, and I think a lot for all of us has happened in the last year. So I just want you to know that like this is like fresh and personal, and I just appreciate you listening. And then after we go through the activity, you'll have some work time to do this for yourself. Like I want you to get something out of this as a person, as you. And then we'll go into small groups and think about this in the context of our work. Sound good? Okay. So the physical, what you can see about me just by looking at me are that I am white and I identify as a woman. I am externally, like I present as able-bodied. And I do wear a ring, so you can tell that I'm a partner that symbolizes that relationship. Like I said, it could be a necklace, it could be a yarmulke, it could be, other external things that people see when they look at you and would understand about you. The second layer, as you get to know me, my most important identity markers are that I am a sister, I am a cousin. I actually identify as an introvert, which is interesting because I think we have this perception of introverts being shy or socially awkward or homebodies or whatever. And it's actually where you get your energy from. So for me, I can present like a full day as friendly and outgoing and energetic. And then at the end of the day, I'm like, I got to recharge. And I do that by being by myself. I identify as an athlete. So I need to be active to be physically and mentally well. I played ice hockey from age 7 to 22. Fun fact about me. And so that's an identity that I have to pay attention to and make sure that I'm taking care of as I get older, and I'm retired. So I like to go for long walks to process, my day. DC is home for me. I obviously identify as an educator. I taught preschool for many years and then went into coaching. A new one as of Tuesday, when I was thinking about this, I was like, I'm a wife, which has been such a fun, such a bright spot in the last year with 2020 and COVID and all of that. So I added that on there. And then being financially independent is important to me, which I'll share more in just a second. But these are things that you would get to know about me over lunch, over a few weeks of working together, or just what I would want you as my colleague or my teammate to know about me. So then the third layer are the people and places and experiences, institutions that have influenced my worldview, how I interact with the world around me. The first big one that comes up is my parents' divorce, which happened when I was young. I'm one of 4 kids, and there's a lot of conflict growing up and not a lot of like resolved conflict. So for that reason, conflict is scary and hard for me. I also saw my parents struggle financially as a result of that divorce, and that's why money, I have no problem saying that like money is my money script, as they call it. Like, it's important to me to have that protection and that security. I was raised Catholic, which I think provided my core values of service and care for others and empathy, all the things that really drive the work that I do today. I also recognize that because of hockey, I had access to educational experiences and institutions that I would not have had access to otherwise. And then finally, the places or the communities that have meant a lot to me were where I taught in Lenox, California, Teach for America, which is what ultimately launched my career in education, and then Fuel Ed. And again, for that same reason that I know we kind of lost that story earlier when I was introducing my work, but Fuel Ed gave me the tools to be able to say, okay, this work is important to me. I know it matters, and here's how I honor the people around me and their experiences. And then finally, Tyler is my husband, and Fuel Ed does a lot of, you probably know this, they do a lot of work around educating people about attachment and understanding our connection with others and how our early experiences influence those attachments. I had not met Tyler yet before I had gone through these experiences, these trainings with Fuel Ed. And I kind of came out of it being like, I'm insecurely attached. What do I do? And that helped me kind of hang in there until I met him. And that's when I was like, okay, this is what it means to be to feel seen, soothed, secure, all those things. So I'm very grateful for him. Our current struggle, and this is, as of Tuesday when I was doing this myself, is trying to start our family, which many people struggle with, and it can be all consuming and it can be scary. And we've had a really tough year there. And I've had to take time off work. So it's complete, like 2 weeks time. I mean, it's been like life stopping in that regard. So that's helped me realize, like, yeah, people need to take time off work, and we can't judge them for it, and we can't make assumptions about why, and we have to just accept and honor why they're taking that time off work. So I don't know if you can tell with my breathing, that was really hard for me. A lot of that's really fresh, and I appreciate you listening. The final step of this exercise is understanding how all those things then show up at work. So how I build relationships, empathy and active listening are critical. So like I said about, needing to take time off work, I'm not going to ask questions. Like, you got to take time, you got time. You're having a tough day, I'm going to hear about it. UPR, that's just a shorthand phrase for unconditional positive regard. I think about that one a lot when I consider giving and receiving feedback. So knowing that whoever's giving me feedback is doing it out of love and care and knowing what I'm capable of. And when I'm giving feedback, it's coming from that same exact place. So that's a value that's really important to me. I have balance down there for the same reason about taking off work. And I have a story that I'll share later this evening about how I manage tasks and relationships at work. But the balance really comes from, like, I tend to lean more tasky because I want to get my work done and then go home at the end of the day and enjoy time with my family, my cats and Tyler. And then finally, I wrote that conflict can be hard. And I think that goes back to like the divorce and what I witnessed growing up or what I didn't witness in terms of conflict resolution. So all that to say, I'm going to pause and just, again, appreciate you listening to my story. This is what you're going to now take time to do. I want to encourage you. I want to just like reiterate the same 2 points before. Think through and share what you want to. You don't have to go as deep as I did, but I just wanted to model, I think, how, like, where it could go. And then the visual that you create, whether it's if it's like mine, if it's not like mine, reflect in a way that's authentic to you. So we're going to pause here and give 10 minutes to take time on your own. You can put your headphones on, you can find a different space, you can just sit at your computer and reflect, whatever is easiest for you. We're going to take, I think, 10 minutes, right, Jasmine?
Yeah, 10 minutes, perfect. And I'll just kind of give you all a little quick look at my journal here. I have my 3 elements here broken
awesome.
down. So I'm excited to sit and just do a little self-reflection. We'll leave the slide up so folks can look at those instructions and just model off of what Katie just shared and writing that out. And then again, take care of yourself. That was an intense moment. And so if you need to turn your screen off, stretch a little bit, walk a little bit, feel free to use this time to just reground as we move into the rest of our time together.
Thanks, Jasmine. So just for any.
Awesome. Welcome back, everybody. So fun to see more faces popping off. I love that, more expressions. Hopefully y'all had a wonderful time to share and reflect together. Just to give you a little layout of how the next half hour will go to finish our time together. So Katie will sort of take back over. We'll sort of do some group share out, sort of a friend of mine calls it harvesting what we shared and the stories and the things that we learned in those really rich growing spaces. And then we'll do a little more, a couple more tips and tricks and lessons learned from Katie in terms of implementing this practice in her work. And I'll finish us off with some Q&A. So we'll end a couple minutes early and we won't go back into breakout rooms. That'll be sort of your one breakout opportunity. So feel free to direct message friends that you made or folks you want to stay connected to. And I'll hand it back to Katie to take over.
Thanks, Jasmine. And thanks, Grace, for handling the small groups also. So I just have 2 questions for everybody. I just want to make sure I wasn't on mute. Perfect. 2 questions is just how did that feel? And then what connections are you starting to make or have you made to how an activity like this contributes to resilience and sustainability on a team or in a school community? So I'm just curious to hear like what this experience was like for you and what connections you're making. And you can come off mute or you can chat in, that's fine too. But I'd love to hear some other voices besides my own.
Oh, kia ora, Katie. My name's Rahira. Kia ora, everybody. I really enjoyed that exercise. It was like unpacking my life right from birth right until now and all that's made me, and then sharing that with someone else. I found that I was really able to connect with that person too, that we had similarities, even though there were some differences. But there were some core values that we shared, and that was quite touching. Yeah.
I'm so glad.
Yeah.
The goal is to either or both learn something about yourself and or learn something about the person you're working alongside. And it's cool that we got to do that tonight with this group. Thank you for sharing. Any other reflections or even just like a one word of how it felt or what you're taking away?
It's interesting and neat, and I think in a safe environment, fun to share these kinds of things with people you haven't met and find where you have commonalities, and just kind of share vulnerability of telling who you are. And how it maybe affects your behavior and how you are today, like the hows that we're talking about. And I think I'm realizing I need a little to a lot more time to really connect a lot of from the identity markers to my lived experiences, and how they sort of propagate the hows of now. Just making light links right now, but I think I can go a lot deeper with more time.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because like I said, I've done this myself. I mean, I've done it for probably 3 or 4 years now, once a year or a little bit more than that before I do this with a school team. And I swear it's different every time. Some things stay the same, but it's just important to the point we were saying earlier, it's important to acknowledge the changes we go through, where we are in the now, which I just love how you framed that. And then the how that shows up at work. Thank you. So I want to leave you, this was supposed to be your time tonight. I also want it to be something you can do with your community, whether it's a team, whether it's the people you manage, even your students. Like, imagine doing this with students. It'd be so cool to see what they have to say and the reflections they come up with. I wanted to offer some lessons that I've learned and some tips and tricks. So the GIF here is just like, well, what do we do? Where do we go from here? What do we do with tonight? And so I have 3 tips I think I would offer you. And the first one being, and I didn't do this well, and part of it was because we got interrupted. I did not situate this in the context of like the world today, but it's important when you do this with your team to people, we're asking a lot of people, right, to go this deep, this fast in a short amount of time. And if there are things that are on their minds or hearts, like COVID, like police violence, like violence against our AAPI community, whatever's going on in the world, it's important to acknowledge that, because otherwise people won't be able to fully engage. And an example of where I didn't do that well was when I came in to do this with a school team whose principal had left very suddenly, just like weeks prior. And I didn't have a lot of context around why that happened, but there were a lot of feelings about it. There was distrust, there was anger, there was tension. And I did not acknowledge that, where people were. And so we didn't get very far, as you can imagine, as a facilitator. I didn't get very far. So it's important to acknowledge what's going on in the world around you, if and when you were to do this with your teammates. The second tip that I would offer, this comes from me participating in this activity as a participant. I did this with a colleague where we had our 4 minutes each to share or whatever. And I shared for the full 4. I mean, you know me by now. I'm a pretty open book. I'll share anything. And I got emotional, and I went there in the 4 minutes. And my colleague took about 30 seconds and said, yep, and that's it. Like, that's me. It was very surface level. And that's okay. It's okay if people aren't ready to go there. But by having a strong model, you can really set the bar for vulnerability, for building trust. You can also just make sure there's consistent expectations about what people are expected to share, or how deeply we should go. Because I think what happened was me and my colleague had inconsistent or differing perspectives on what the activity was, and that was hard. That then bred distrust with my colleague. I then felt kind of shamed. I kind of felt like, did I do this right? Did I do this wrong? And it was just like a scary experience for me. So I would encourage you, if you were to facilitate this or have a teammate facilitate this, I would just make sure that model is strong. And I'm not saying my model is perfect by any means, but in terms of the experience you're trying to create, make sure that that's modeled for folks. And then finally, like this is identity work. And I'm sorry, I didn't see who just shared, but about this idea, like identity work, it's going to take iterations. It's going to take time. It's work. It's not going to happen in a 2-hour session. So this is not a one and done thing. How do you make sure that there is time and space for managers in particular, because those relationships are really important, managers and or team leads or the people that work together closest, to say, like, what should I know about you? How do you feel about the dress code? What hours do you need to work? Because maybe you're a caregiver and need to pick somebody up, or my father-in-law lived with us for a while, and that impacted what hours I could be online and available, depending on appointments and all that. So I would just think through where do you go from here? It could be just as simple as a 10-minute check-in at the start of every meeting. It could be following up on how you like or prefer to receive feedback and like changing, meeting that person where they are. For me, an example of this was with a colleague who I at this point had worked with for about 4 years, I think 3 or 4 years. And I realized this, like I had this realization about why I'm so tasky, why I just want to put my head down and get to work. Part of it is being an introvert. You know, happy hours were not my thing. But also, like, I ate lunch at my desk and I just wanted to get my stuff done, where she was much more relationship oriented and needed that time for me to get the tasks done. And when we did this exercise together as teammates, we were able to realize that difference, acknowledge it, and then like figure out how to meet each other where we were, which is really important. So I'm no expert, but those would be my tips and tricks for if you'd like to bring this to your team or community. And I hope you do. And I also hope that you reach out and let me know how it goes, or if I could be helpful in any way. I think that's all I have here.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for all that you've shared. I want to first just invite folks, please feel free to drop any questions that you have about this activity, implementation, what Kati shared about herself or about this work into the chat. If you want, you can probably unshare your screen, Kati, if you want. We'll just do a little Q&A time, me and you.
Love it.
So to finish our time, I have a couple of questions written down to just help us kind of dive a little bit deeper into your work, into your learnings and reflections, and sort of how you've seen this tool and this perspective be impactful. And then also pull in questions from the chat as folks have them. I think the first piece here, I'm really curious, when you work with teams, what's the greatest maybe barrier for folks sharing, being vulnerable, having this level of self-reflection? Like, what do you see thematically as most common?
That's a good question. I think it's, why do we have to talk about this at work? I think it's that hesitation of like, you're just making me sit here and talk about my feelings. Why does that matter? And it's actually not talking about feelings. It is self-awareness. It is emotional intelligence. It is like, here's what I need to be my best at work. And I want to know what you need too. Yep. So we can honor that. So I think that's actually probably the most common thing I hear.
So fascinating. So fascinating. I think that someone I think in the group share out might have mentioned, I wrote these 2 words down, safety and vulnerability, and how like they are integral to each other, right? Without safety, it's really difficult to be vulnerable. When we think about folks in the space who are leaders, who are in the classroom, do you have any tips or things you've seen maybe with clients, with partners through your own experience that are really useful in terms of building a sense, even just baseline safety enough that you can share some of these pieces, right? Because even just sharing a bit of who you are can feel very
oh, totally. I mean, you all saw me. That was not easy for me to share tonight. And I've done this activity before. Like I get that. I think of it in terms, as a great question, in terms of pre and post. So pre-activity, you're setting the expectations that like you just share what you're comfortable sharing. We're not here to like, this is not therapy, it's not clinical. We are not trained to handle, trauma. Yes. Right. So share what you want, need to share. That's pre. Post, this was related to the coworker, the example I just shared, the task versus relationships, where the reason why we figured this out was because of the activity and the 24-48 hour rule. Has anyone heard of that? Like, give me a thumbs up or chat in. It's a norm that just says if and when someone says something that either like you're a fan of and hits you the right way, or it rubs you the wrong way, you say something within 24 hours. So you commit to giving feedback and you commit to communicating how something landed with you. After the 24 hours, you can sit in your feelings and be upset about it. After 48 hours, you commit to letting it go if you haven't said anything. So the reason why this connects to this activity is I think leaders who see their staff going there and who see their staff trying or see them having a hard time, 24 hours, say something, one-on-one follow-up, and just say, hey, like I saw that, and I'm here for you, or whatever that looks like in your own words. But I hope that's
an awesome. I'm going to kind of take that. We talk about, I feel like having a feedback culture, but I really love that framework around not letting things fester. And I think there's also a piece too on the positive side, right? When you see that someone's having a hard time, making it a priority to acknowledge that you see someone trying, right? Or that you see someone struggling, whether that be, again, like with their family or like having to take time off, just prioritizing acknowledgement and prioritizing communication can really help so that things don't fester and so people don't feel invisible or unseen, which could is so much the foundation of that lack of safety and trust.
Yeah. And it's hard. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I think I've been on teams and in workplaces where feedback was not normalized, and it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Both to receive, it's also like shocking to receive if it's not normalized, right? And then I don't know. It's still something I'm working on. I don't do it comfortably, but yeah.
We have a couple questions. I'll ask the ones that we popped into the chat. So in our group, this is from Sadie. We discussed the things shared possibly being used against you later on in your career. Thoughts on addressing that within an organization? Yeah, I mean, that's a systemic issue. That is something that's probably out of your locus of control, and then it's your comfort level with what you want to share. I say systemic because we live in a very white dominant society culture that includes workplace and how we operate, and there are lots of unfair practices that happen, and so I would just, in that case, I would just keep your guard up, like what protects safety for you, I think, if that makes sense. Yeah. I love that. And I think that piece as well, like you said, figuring out in a way, all vulnerability is a risk, right? This was a risk. Any vulnerability is a risk. And it's figuring out, in order for me to be whole, in order for me to show up as a human, what am I willing to risk? And I think, again, we all have a different scale, right? It's like, I may not want to, admit my mental health diagnosis because I know the environment I'm in, it's not safe here. Yeah. But I might feel okay to name my politics because it feels essential to how I show up as a leader. Right. So it's just a forever dance, I think, as well, just naming that for myself and what I've witnessed.
Well, the other thing is too, like, you can do the reflection, you can do the self-work, and you don't have to say it out loud. You know what I mean? Like, it's important for you to, whatever it is, it's important for you to do that work, but you don't owe anybody anything in terms of what you share.
Totally. There's power there.
Right.
There's a couple more questions in the chat that I'll move into as well. We have one from Jillian. I think it's pronounced Jillian. Do you think it is easier to be vulnerable with strangers because they are not part of your circle, so they're less likely to disclose information about you and make you feel exposed? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd be curious to hear what other people say too, just based on your experience tonight. I think sometimes that gets into like human psychology and and social psychology and all of that. I think it's really interesting. Yeah. I personally don't. I can share openly with strangers, but I've also been that's my training. I am a psych major. I taught preschool, so I had to teach kids how to do what I'm doing, like little 4-year-olds, right? And then feel led and what I've learned through them. I've been trained. Not everyone's been trained. So might not have that comfort level, and that's okay too.
Yeah, I can speak just from with Feel Like, because we host events and we also deliver them in school environments to specific teams. Again, it just depends on the environment, right? Some teams will have the richest sharing because there is a shared sense of connectivity, so that the depth of sharing can be even more extreme, more acute. And then other times having a more, when we used to get together in person, having 30 people from across the country in the same room can create the most free, liberating experience. So a lot of it, I think, is just context and conditions in my experience.
I'll also just add just an interesting reflection on my work. So I've been doing Stay the Course for almost 4 years now. None of my work has been in person. All of it has been virtual. Most of it has been over the phone. So just an interesting thought on maybe there is something safer about I don't know, there's some distance, anonymity that allows you to go there. It's really, really interesting to think about. So that's a great question.
Especially if safety isn't already pre-established, right? If you are treading water and you might want to be in your own context or go to your room during the breakout time, that can also be a great way to start bringing some of this in if the team isn't built on full safety.
Yeah.
I think that there may be some safety in the anonymity. Being online also doesn't give you that well, I'm social. I'm a social being, and I love the touching, the hugging, the facial, what you can see, the body language, and there is a disconnect when we are online. So it's easy to be present physically, but absent emotionally, mentally, to answer correctly, but still be behind a mask or behind not connecting 100% with the persons who are in front of you. I also think that in terms of what Jillian asked, if it was easier to probably, because they're persons who you don't know, but I think that for me, I can do both, and I mostly do both because of my type of personality. But it is more a situational, or it is who you are inherently, your events that shaped you, that decides whether you can share liberally with a person or not, basically. And it gets a little bit more involved, I think, that especially if you have events in your life that are not as positive. So I think that is what may shape you, and until you learn and you treat with that, then you may not be as open with anyone.
Oh, I think you're so right. Yeah, I think you answered that question better than
that was really good, Roberta. Yeah, and I love that piece too. Like you said, a lot of it is about the events that, like, who you are, and again, it's kind of like that spectrum of where you feel comfortable sharing, how much, with whom. It's such a dynamic process.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah,
thank you
for sharing. And I will just ask one more question, and then we'll move into some little last housekeeping and closeouts before we head off into our evenings or very early mornings for some folks who are not in the States. But so Joy asked, have you found creative ways to integrate this into existing structures and responsibilities in schools? And do you have good follow-up ideas so that it isn't shared and then dropped?
Yes, great question. So I think specifically, one, I would say regular feedback loops. How am I doing? How are you doing? And where is that coming from? So like I could just say, hey, I'm really struggling with XYZ task, but it's coming from, I've got my father-in-law living with me and I'm exhausted and I can't, and I need some flexibility or some grace or some understanding. Or, so I think it's just committing to making sure it's regular, even if it's just 10 minutes at the start of a check-in, and just saying like, how are you? What do you need? Those are the two questions I ask my teachers. How are you and what do you need? And then I would just open yourself up to being flexible with work hours, online expectations, even dress or appearance, or how feedback is delivered. I had one teacher who preferred feedback in writing before we talked about it, so she had time to process, right? And that comes from somewhere.
Yeah.
So I would go back to those 4 questions that were shared before the small groups about building relationships, communicating, conflict. And there was another one. But I would go back to those because they're super concrete and they translate directly to how you work together.
Absolutely. And I think just to piggyback on that, it's also thinking about positionality. So where do you have power, authority, and influence, right? If you have an hour and a half to lead a PD with your staff, you can choose to bring this in as a formal activity, right? Or maybe, again, you are a supervisor and you meet with people every week and you want to use some of this as a way to bridge that relationship. Or maybe it's with your students that you want to do some of this work. So I think you can really be creative about, where do I have influence? Where do I have authority? And bringing this in on any scale, whether it be with a massive group or with one person or with a kiddo. That's great. That spectrum of choice. Because
people are watching, whether it's teammates, whether it's kids, whether it's people you manage or people who are managing you, they're watching you. So if you can get these things right, where you're saying like, I understand myself at work and I understand you at work, it's going to transform the whole team and the work environment. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Well said, Jasmine.
This was so great. Well, I'm going to screen share and kind of close us out. So we have a couple more minutes to our evening. First, I just want to say thank you so much to Katie. You were an amazing speaker, so much richness. Loved the Q&A, the activity. And I'm just so grateful for everyone who moved into the group space and was willing to share. And also for moving through that really unprecedented Zoom bombing experience. That was a first for me ever. And so I just really appreciate you all being responsive, flexible, and being willing to kind of co-regulate and ground together in self-reflection as well as in group processing spaces. So first, if you can please submit your feedback. So Grace will be sending out a link in the chat. This will also come in a follow-up email tomorrow. Just give us any feedback that you have about what you might want to see improved in the space, what you really liked about it. Anything for Katie, if you're like, this was so cool, or like, I loved this part of your presentation. All that information is so useful, both for the speaker, Katie, as well as for Fuel Ed to kind of think about how we can pull in your feedback to craft more content that's really, really, again, for you, by you, and centered around the needs that you have in these spaces. And then second, just want to direct you to our website. If you go to fueledschools.org/events, you'll see information about other upcoming events. So if you're an alumni, if you've been through one of Fuel Ed's programs before, you have access to empathy circles, which happen once a month. We have one next week. And if you're not, there's additional events. There's webinars that are happening. We have cool collaborations that are going on with other leaders in the world of education. And our next gathering will also be posted on the website. And you'll get an email about when it's up on Eventbrite to register. That'll be happening the first week in September. So feel free to kind of peruse that area and you'll be connected to us and get more information in the coming days as is necessary. So again, I'm just going to redirect you back one more time to do the feedback form if you haven't done it yet. It's so essential and we really, really appreciate that work. And then to close us out, I would love it if folks put in the chat maybe 1 to 2 words on just how you're feeling before we go. We can kind of have a little cloud of just feelings and words pop in there. I'll read them out and then we'll leave early to have a good evening. Loving these words, feeling great, fruitful session, super useful exercises, connected, grateful, inspired. And I will say that I feel impressed. I feel deeply impressed by all of us and all of you. All right, friends, well, have a good evening and feel free to reach out directly to me, Jasmine Barnes. My email's on the website if you need anything or have any questions or thoughts. Have a good evening.